Hi guys, so now that you've learned about the plasma membrane and all the different parts of the plasma membrane, the phospholipid bilayer, the proteins that are going to communicate, there are also going to be channel proteins as well as cholesterol. We're going to talk a little bit about cell transport and how the cell gets things from the outside in or from the inside out. There are three different ways. The first way is diffusion, the second way is facilitated diffusion, and the third way is active transport. So let's first go into diffusion. Diffusion is the natural tendency for molecules to move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And this requires no energy whatsoever. It just kind of follows the natural world. So for this example, I have a cell, and here's my nucleus with the DNA. And let's say, for instance, you take a breath. You breathe in oxygen. Your cell now is surrounded by a lot of oxygen. There's more oxygen on the outside of the cell. So it has a higher concentration of oxygen on the outside of the cell than it does on the inside of the cell. So the plasma membrane is permeable to oxygen. It's also permeable to water and other small molecules. It's not permeable to ions. But so now that there's a higher concentration on the outside and the inside, what they want to happen, those molecules want to happen is equalize or create an equilibrium between the outside and the inside. So those oxygen molecules are going to move into the cell until there's an equilibrium. And it's considered a dynamic equilibrium because molecules are always moving, but they're always going to want to create this point where there's the exact same concentration of oxygen molecules on the outside of the cell as there is on the inside of the cell. So they must pass through this semi-permeable membrane. So part of diffusion, osmosis falls under diffusion. It is a form of diffusion. Osmosis is just the movement of water from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So on the outside of this cell, we have a lot of water, a lot of solvent or liquid. On the inside of the cell, we have a lot of solutes. Solutes are just the particles that aren't liquid, so amino acids, protein, glucose, lots of those solvents. So the water is going to want to equalize and create an equilibrium, so it's going to want to move into the cell to try to balance the amount of water that's on both sides of that membrane, so both sides of the plasma membrane. So this is osmosis, the movement of water. In order to understand osmosis and what water would do in a different type of solution, let's first learn about three different types of solution that a cell could be in. The first one is a hypertonic solution. That's a solution that contains a higher concentration of solute. Thus, it has a lower concentration of water, and the water is going to want to move towards that hypertonic solution. Another solution that a cell could be in is a hypotonic solution. So that's a solution that contains a lower concentration of solute and thus a higher concentration of water. Therefore, water is going to move away from the hypotonic solution to try to dilute the solution of dilute the cell. And then lastly is the isotonic solution. That's just a solution that contains an equal concentration of solute. Thus, there's an equal concentration of water, and the water is going to remain in a dynamic equilibrium. There's not going to be any movement of the water towards one part of the solution or the other to go into the cell or out of the cell. Now let's take a look at an actual cell and see what would happen in different types of solutions. So the solution outside of this cell is hypotonic. That means it has less salt and more water than the cell. You have 5% salt, the cell has 10% salt. The cell is said to be hypertonic. That means the solution or its environment has more salt and less water than the environment surrounding it. So if the cell membrane is only permeable to water, then the water would travel from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell. So from higher water concentration to lower water concentration, the cell would then swell and maybe even pop. So the second type of cell transport is facilitated diffusion. So it's just like diffusion. It requires no energy, no ATP. It also moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. But we're now moving things in facilitated diffusion that are bigger, things that can't pass through the plasma membrane just by kind of bouncing around through the little phospholipid bilayer. These molecules like glucose or amino acids, they need to move through a protein channel. So in this instance, I have a high concentration of glucose on the inside of my cell. It's going to move passively, so without any energy, to an area of low concentration of glucose on the outside of my cell. So you're going to see that facilitated diffusion. Then the third form of cell transport is active transport, and this requires energy, or ATP. So this is going to be moving against what naturally happens in the world. It's going to be moving against what diffusion has been doing. We're going to be moving from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. So this is going to have the cell require energy. So for this example, in the cell we have a low concentration of sodium. The cell is going to pump that sodium using energy outside the cell where there's already a high concentration of sodium. So it's going to need to use a protein channel, and that protein channel is going to require energy to pump those things out against the concentration gradient. So I hope you guys understand diffusion is an osmosis, facilitated diffusion, and active transport. If you don't, I'd ask you to rewatch the video or go to some of the links on our playlist. As well, we're going to be doing a couple of experiments to show you guys exactly what is happening with these 3 different types of cell transport. Thanks.